HOA leadership scrambled to recover $35,400 sent to a fraudulent company operating in secret. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Marissa Delgado arrived at the Willow Creek Community Center, her steps echoing across the polished tiles. She had been called in for an emergency board meeting, one that had the potential to upend months of careful planning and community trust. Rumors had been swirling for weeks about missing funds, but no one had concrete proof. Until now. As she pushed open the glass doors, she noticed the faces of her fellow homeowners, each one etched with worry and suspicion. The usual hum of casual conversation had been replaced by an uneasy silence, punctuated only by the soft whir of the air conditioner. Marissa, who had served on the HOA board for over 4 years, could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. $35,400 had been withdrawn from the community's reserve fund, and initial investigations suggested that the money had been sent to a company no one on the board recognized. The company, listed under a generic name, had no physical address, no verified licenses, and almost no online footprint. "How do we even begin to trace this?" whispered one of the homeowners, a retired accountant named Leonard Hayes, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled through the folder Marissa had provided. Inside the boardroom, tension simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over. Marissa glanced at the faces around the oval table. There was Daniel Wu, the board president, who had always prided himself on meticulous record-keeping, but now looked pale and defeated. Across from him sat Sofia Hernandez, a young mother and community volunteer who had recently joined the finance committee. Her notebook was open, pages scribbled with frantic calculations. "We need to act fast," Marissa said, trying to assert calm. "The longer this sits, the harder it will be to recover anything. And we can't let this erode the trust of our residents." Her words hung in the air, heavy with urgency. The first step was tracing the transaction. The bank records showed a wire transfer sent 3 weeks earlier, but the receiving account had vanished into obscurity. Marissa's heart sank as she realized the complexity of the situation. Someone, or some entity, had exploited the board's oversight during a routine payment approval. The HOA had been growing, adding new landscaping projects, painting schedules, and community upgrades. In that flurry of activity, a fraudulent company had slipped through the cracks. The irony was cruel. In a bid to improve the neighborhood, they had unwittingly opened the door to a scammer's scheme. Marissa and the finance committee began by calling the bank. After 2 hours on hold, they finally spoke to a representative who confirmed their worst fears. The receiving account had been closed immediately after the deposit cleared, and the bank had no record of the company beyond basic registration data. "It's like they never existed," Marissa muttered, flipping through the printed emails from the supposed contractor. Each email had been professionally written, almost convincing, with letterhead and fake references. Someone had gone to meticulous lengths to fabricate legitimacy. Sophia leaned forward, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "We might be looking at organized fraud, not just a random mistake," she said. Marissa nodded. The realization that this was more than a simple accounting error made her stomach churn. Outside the boardroom window, the neighborhood stretched quietly, unaware of the storm brewing in its center. Children played in yards, just steps away from where the board scrambled to piece together the puzzle. Marissa thought of the families who relied on the HOA for safety, maintenance, and community harmony. Losing $35,400 wasn't just a financial blow. It was a fracture in the very trust that held Willow Creek together. If news leaked without a plan to address it, the board risked alienating every homeowner, and the reputation they had spent years building could crumble overnight. Determined to uncover the truth, Marissa organized a plan of action. First, they would review every invoice and contract from the past 6 months looking for anomalies. Next, they would consult a forensic accountant familiar with fraudulent schemes in small businesses and residential communities. Finally, they would prepare a detailed report for the homeowners, one that is transparent enough to maintain trust while protecting the ongoing investigation. As the board members divided tasks, Marissa felt a strange mix of dread and resolve. They had been caught off guard, but the path forward was clear. Investigate meticulously, expose the deception, and attempt to recover what had been lost. Even as they started contacting vendors and checking state business licenses, a nagging doubt lingered. How had a company operating entirely in secrecy managed to bypass the HOA's approval process? Who had created the fake documents, and why had no one noticed sooner? The questions seemed endless, and Marissa realized that uncovering the truth would require more than just reviewing paperwork. It would demand confronting uncomfortable possibilities, even among those she trusted most. She glanced at Daniel, whose jaw was tight and eyes fixed on his phone. "We need to be ready for anything," she said quietly, almost to herself. The room fell silent again, everyone absorbed in the weight of what had happened and what was still to come. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished table, Marissa felt a chill. This wasn't just about money. It was about accountability, vigilance, and the fragile bond between a community and the people elected to protect it. The fraudster might be invisible for now, but Marissa knew that every lead they uncovered would bring them one step closer to catching them. And step by step, they would have to chase the truth before Willow Creek paid the price. The day after the shocking revelation, Willow Creek seemed to move in slow motion. The usual hum of suburban life, the soft rumble of cars, the laughter of children, the barking of dogs, felt hollow to Marissa Delgado as she entered the community center early that morning. She carried a stack of folders, each filled with invoices, contracts, and emails. Her steps echoed across the empty hall, and she could almost feel the weight of the missing $35,400 pressing down on the polished tile beneath her feet. She had spent the night awake, replaying the discovery of the fraudulent transfer over and over in her mind, imagining every step she might have missed, every approval she might have signed too quickly. Inside the boardroom, a few other members had already gathered. Leonard Hayes, the retired accountant, looked pale and jittery, his fingers drumming nervously against the edge of the table. Sofia Hernandez, the young mother who had joined the finance committee just a few months ago, sat hunched over her laptop, eyes scanning spreadsheets with a precision that suggested she hadn't slept either. Daniel Wu, the board president, arrived shortly afterward, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible tension. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustling of papers and the occasional beep from Sofia's computer. The gravity of the situation hung over them like a storm cloud, and no one spoke until Marissa cleared her throat. "We can't waste another hour," Marissa said, placing her folders in front of her. Her voice was steady, but her mind raced. "We need to trace every dollar and figure out exactly how this company slipped through our approvals. I know it looks bad, but we have to be methodical." She flipped through the first folder, noting inconsistencies that she had initially overlooked. "See this?" she said, pointing at an invoice. "The signature here doesn't match the vendor records, and the email came from a domain that was active for less than a month. Whoever did this went to a lot of trouble to seem legitimate." Leonard leaned over, adjusting his glasses. "These are all signs of a sophisticated scam," he muttered. "They knew exactly how to exploit a small HOA's processes. Look at the way the amounts are rounded to make them seem like standard maintenance fees. Each entry is small enough to avoid triggering suspicion individually, but together they total $35,400. He shook his head, visibly frustrated. "I've seen embezzlement before, but this is next level." Sophia clicked through her spreadsheets rapidly. "And it's not just the amounts," she added. "The dates are all strategically placed. Look, most of these transfers occurred during holidays or board absences. Whoever did this knew when attention would be lowest." Her brow furrowed as she scrolled through the email trail. "I've tried calling the listed contacts for this company, but none of the numbers are real. And the address? There's nothing there. No office, no sign, no record." She looked up at the group. It's like they existed in thin air. Realizing they needed professional help, Marissa had already arranged for a forensic accountant to join them. Marcus Lee arrived just before noon, carrying a briefcase filled with documents, a laptop, and a quiet confidence that made the room feel slightly less hopeless. He was in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed, and his sharp eyes scanned the boardroom as if he could see through walls. "I've read the preliminary information you sent," he said, setting down his briefcase. "Now let's see everything. Invoices, contracts, emails, bank statements. Every single piece of paper that touches this transfer. The sooner we start, the sooner we can trace the money." His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for hesitation. Marissa felt a surge of hope. This was the expertise they desperately needed. For the next several hours, Marcus worked methodically, flipping through each document, checking signatures, tracing email headers, and highlighting anomalies. Occasionally, he would mutter to himself, drawing curious looks from the board members. "Notice this," he said, pointing to a sequence of transfers. "They've been routed through multiple accounts across different banks and even different states. It's a classic layering technique, designed to confuse anyone trying to follow the money. Whoever set this up has experience in financial manipulation." His explanation made Marissa's stomach tighten. The fraud wasn't just clever. It was deliberate, calculated, and intended to evade detection. Outside the window, the neighborhood remained deceptively calm. Children played in yards, neighbors walked dogs, and the low hum of life continued as if nothing had happened. But inside the boardroom, tension was building like steam in a pressure cooker. Each discovery felt like a hammer striking the walls of their trust. Marissa noticed Daniel's hands trembling as he scrolled through a spreadsheet, and even Leonard seemed lost in thought, mumbling numbers to himself. "How did we let this happen?" Daniel finally asked, voice tight with frustration. "We've been careful with every payment for years." Marissa met his gaze. "We were careful, yes, but not careful enough. This wasn't just an oversight. Someone designed this to slip past your controls." The hours passed slowly, punctuated by the occasional sigh or frustrated exclamation. As they dug deeper, the team uncovered a pattern in the fake company's operations. Emails were sent from temporary servers, contracts were copied and slightly altered from legitimate vendors, and every communication was timed to coincide with minimal board oversight. Marcus called it surgical fraud. "They knew exactly when to strike," he said. "Every loophole, every absence, every holiday, they exploited it. Recovering the money is possible, but it's going to require persistence, coordination, and luck. You'll need to work with the banks, law enforcement, and possibly federal authorities if the trail leads across state lines." By late afternoon, the board had divided responsibilities. Leonard would focus on internal approvals, tracing which board members had signed off and when. Sophia would analyze all communication with the fraudulent company, searching for patterns or clues to their real identity. Marcus would coordinate with the banks, using his contacts to uncover hidden accounts and trace wire transfers. Marissa and Daniel would handle communications with residents, preparing statements that were transparent enough to maintain trust without jeopardizing the ongoing investigation. "We can't panic the homeowners," Marissa reminded them. "But they need to know we're taking action." Daniel nodded, his jaw tight with determination. Even as the board worked tirelessly, Marissa couldn't shake a nagging sense of dread. The fraudulent company had left virtually no trace of its existence, and every clue seemed to lead to dead ends. She replayed the steps they had taken over the last few weeks, wondering if a small oversight had made this possible. Her thoughts drifted to the families in Willow Creek, the children who played outside, and the elderly residents who relied on community services. Losing $35,400 wasn't just a financial hit. It was a breach of trust, a crack in the foundation of the community she had spent years helping to build. As night fell and the fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the boardroom, Marissa remained at her laptop, scrolling through emails once more. She felt a mixture of fear and resolve. This wasn't just about recovering money. It was about accountability, vigilance, and protecting the integrity of the neighborhood. Each lead Marcus uncovered brought them closer to understanding the scope of the scam, but it also reminded them of the challenge ahead. Somewhere in the intricate web of transfers and fake identities lay the key to recovering the missing funds, and they had to find it before it disappeared entirely. By the time the other board members left, exhausted but determined, Marissa was still there, reviewing every document, analyzing every signature, and tracing every dollar. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, discoveries, and possibly new surprises about the fraudulent company operating in secret. Yet despite the exhaustion and mounting pressure, she felt a stubborn flame of hope. Willow Creek had been caught off guard, but it was far from defeated. The hunt for the missing $35,400 had only just begun, and Marissa was determined to see it through to the end, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The next morning, Willow Creek was shrouded in a pale fog, softening the edges of the suburban streets and muffling the sounds of early traffic. Marissa Delgado arrived at the community center before sunrise, her coat wrapped tightly around her as if to shield her from the chill that had settled over both the neighborhood and her thoughts. The events of the previous day replayed endlessly in her mind. The fake invoices, the vanished bank accounts, the meticulous patterns of deception. It was almost unimaginable that a company could operate so thoroughly in secret, yet here they were, a board determined to trace a phantom. Sofia Hernandez was already there, sipping coffee and scrolling through a seemingly endless thread of emails she had downloaded from the HOA server. "I think I found something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking louder might scare the lead away. She handed Marissa her laptop, pointing at a series of messages that at first glance seemed innocuous. Friendly exchanges with other vendors, routine scheduling emails. But when traced back, originated from the same temporary servers as the fraudulent company. "They're leaving breadcrumbs," Sofia continued. "Tiny ones, barely noticeable, but consistent. Someone wants us to find them, or maybe they're just sloppy." Marissa frowned. Even the slightest oversight could either help them recover the funds or mislead them completely. Marcus Lee arrived shortly after, briefcase in hand, looking as calm as ever, but with eyes that betrayed a sharp focus. "I've been reviewing the bank statements overnight," he said, spreading printed sheets across the table. "There are transfers that trace back to accounts linked to other shell companies, some of which have been flagged for suspicious activity in other states. Whoever is behind this has a network, and it's not small." He paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. "If we follow this carefully, we might be able to recover at least part of the $35,400. But every step we take has to be calculated. One wrong move, and the trail goes cold." Marissa leaned back, rubbing her temples. It was overwhelming, almost too much to process. They were dealing with a network of professional fraudsters, not just a single rogue operator. And while the thought of involving law enforcement lingered, she knew that too early a report could tip off the perpetrators. They needed concrete leads first, something tangible to present to the authorities. Daniel Wu arrived mid-morning, carrying a stack of binders and a sense of determination that was almost palpable. "I've started reviewing board approvals from the past year," he said. "There are patterns in the timing, the amounts, even the names of those signing off. I've flagged anything that doesn't match our standard process." His words brought a sliver of reassurance. They were finally connecting the dots, even if the picture was still murky. Hours passed as the board dug deeper. Leonard Hayes focused intently on tracing internal approvals, his experience as an accountant proving invaluable. He discovered that the fraudulent company's invoices had consistently been approved during periods when one or two board members were absent or distracted. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was deliberate. "Someone knew exactly when to push these through," Leonard said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "It's like they had a calendar of our absences." Sofia, meanwhile, had identified a pattern in the emails. Small typographical errors, repeated phrases, and signature anomalies that suggested a single individual or team was orchestrating all communication. Marissa couldn't shake the thought that the fraudster might be watching their progress, testing how quickly the board could respond. By late afternoon, Marcus had made a breakthrough. Using his contacts in the banking industry, he traced a portion of the transferred funds to a small credit union in another state. The account had been opened under a name that mimicked a legitimate construction business, but further digging revealed it was a shell, with no verified employees, no office, and no public presence. "We've got a lead," Marcus announced. The room erupted in a mix of relief and anxiety. They had finally found something tangible, but the challenge was far from over. The funds were still effectively inaccessible, and retrieving them would require legal intervention and careful coordination. As the board considered its next steps, Marissa received a text message from an unknown number. It was short, cryptic, and unsettling. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Her heart skipped a beat. She showed the message to Daniel and Marcus, who immediately understood the implications. This wasn't just an administrative error or a poorly managed vendor. Someone was willing to threaten the board to protect their scheme. The gravity of the situation intensified. Marissa realized that they were no longer just chasing missing funds. They were navigating a dangerous game with a hidden adversary who had already proven both cunning and bold. The evening descended on Willow Creek as the board members reluctantly left the center, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Marissa walked past the quiet streets, noticing the familiar houses and yards that had always represented safety and stability. Yet tonight, everything felt fragile. Someone had breached that security, exploiting trust for personal gain. The $35,400 might be recoverable, but the larger lesson was painfully clear. Vigilance was not optional. The community they loved had been tested, and the path to restoration would be long and arduous. That night, Marissa stayed awake at her kitchen table, a dim lamp casting shadows over spreadsheets and notes. She traced the wire transfers again, step by step, mapping every account, every date, every anomaly. The threat in the text message lingered in her mind, a chilling reminder that the perpetrator was aware of their progress. But alongside the fear, a steely determination took root. Willow Creek would not be intimidated. The HOA board had uncovered a fraud sophisticated enough to elude ordinary detection, but they also had something the scammer lacked: persistence, strategy, and a community ready to fight for its integrity. In the early hours of the morning, Marissa finally leaned back, exhausted but resolute. The investigation was far from over. Leads would emerge, false trails would mislead them, and obstacles would appear at every turn. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of purpose. They had found a thread in the tangled web of deception, and by following it, they could begin to unravel the mystery, recover the stolen funds, and hold the fraudsters accountable. Tomorrow, the board would reconvene, armed with evidence, analysis, and an unwavering determination to reclaim what had been lost. Willow Creek's battle had only just begun, and the story of the missing $35,400 was entering a new, more dangerous chapter. The sun rose over Willow Creek, scattering gold across quiet streets and manicured lawns. But inside the community center, tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marissa Delgado arrived early, coffee in hand, her mind already racing through every piece of the puzzle. The board had reconvened with a single purpose: to move from investigation to action. The faint glow of morning light caught the edges of Marcus Lee's neatly stacked files, and the room smelled faintly of printer ink and anxiety. Marcus was already seated, reviewing a dossier he had prepared overnight. "I've coordinated with law enforcement and the banks," he said, speaking in a calm, precise tone that seemed to anchor the room. "We have a potential path to freeze part of the stolen funds, but it requires swift action. The account we traced yesterday isn't fully secured, and the fraudster may move the money again at any moment." Timing is everything. Marissa listened intently, her heart hammering. Finally, they had a concrete step forward. Sofia Hernandez tapped her pen nervously on her notebook. "We also need to notify residents, at least partially," she said. "People are asking questions, rumors are spreading. If we don't communicate, trust will erode faster than the funds were stolen." Marissa nodded. Transparency had always been central to Willow Creek's governance, but this situation required balance. Too much detail could jeopardize the investigation. Daniel Wu, the board president, frowned, leaning forward. "We also have to be prepared for backlash. Some homeowners might blame the board for negligence, even if we're acting now. It's going to get personal. Marcus outlined the next steps with precision. First, legal action would be initiated to secure a court order to freeze the identified accounts. Second, they would work with federal authorities to trace the movement of funds across state lines. Third, a careful communication plan would be drafted to inform residents of progress without revealing sensitive details. Each step was a race against time. The moment the fraudster realized the board was close to uncovering them, the money could vanish again. As the morning progressed, tension mounted. Leonard Hayes had uncovered a startling discovery. One of the shell accounts used in the transfers bore the same phone number and mailing address that had been listed on a previous, seemingly unrelated HOA contractor application. The coincidence was alarming. "It's not just a shell company anymore," Leonard said gravely. "They've been operating within reach of the HOA before, possibly even under our noses. Someone manipulated the system long before this transfer." The room fell silent. The realization that the board had unknowingly interacted with the fraudster months ago shook their confidence. By mid-afternoon, Marcus received word from the bank's legal department. A temporary freeze had been placed on part of the account, buying the board crucial time. Relief swept through the room, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the majority of the funds were still in motion. The fraudster had anticipated scrutiny and split the transfers across multiple accounts. They would have to trace each one carefully, and even then, recovery was not guaranteed. Marissa, trying to maintain composure, suggested dividing the investigation into parallel tracks. Sophia would continue combing communications for clues about the fraudster's identity. Daniel and Leonard would map all internal approvals and anomalies, and Marcus would liaise with law enforcement and the banks. "We can't leave any stone unturned," she emphasized. "Every pattern, every discrepancy, every tiny clue might be what cracks this case open." The board nodded, understanding the stakes were higher than ever. Just as the team began working, Marissa's phone buzzed. It was another cryptic message from an unknown number. "You're getting too close. Stop now." Her fingers tightened around the device. The tone was menacing, a reminder that the person or group behind the fraud was aware of their progress. Marcus, upon seeing the message, immediately suggested forwarding it to law enforcement. "This is evidence," he said. "It proves the perpetrator knows your investigation is active. We need to handle this carefully but assertively." The evening descended over Willow Creek, but inside the community center, urgency burned like a relentless fire. The board continued working late into the night, reviewing contracts, analyzing email headers, and mapping every suspicious transaction. Each discovery brought both hope and dread. Sophia uncovered that some of the fake company's emails had originated from IP addresses connected to a small business park across the state, possibly a rented office used solely for fraud. Leonard identified a pattern in the approval signatures that suggested someone familiar with internal board procedures had orchestrated the timing of the fraudulent transfers. As midnight approached, Marissa felt a wave of exhaustion but refused to step away. She traced wire transfers one by one, following a complex path through multiple accounts, some of which had already been frozen by Marcus's efforts. Then, a breakthrough. A partial trail led to a legitimate landscaping business in a nearby town. The name was slightly altered, the contact numbers faked, but cross-referencing licenses revealed the company was real, and someone had hijacked its identity to move funds. Marissa's heart raced. They had found a tangible lead, one that could allow authorities to track down the fraudster more directly. With this revelation, Marcus called the board together for a strategic session. "We have a clear path now," he said. "The fraudster's network is sophisticated, but this hijacked company gives us a point of entry. We can follow this trail, coordinate with law enforcement, and hopefully recover the bulk of the missing $35,400. But we must act carefully. One wrong step could alert them and push the funds further out of reach." Despite the progress, the atmosphere remained tense. Marissa realized the fight was far from over. The fraudster had already shown cunning, patience, and an uncanny understanding of HOA operations. This was no simple crime of opportunity. It was a calculated assault on the trust and finances of Willow Creek. Yet, In the quiet moments between calls and emails, she felt a flicker of hope. They had a lead, and for the first time, the possibility of reclaiming the stolen funds seemed within reach. As the board finally left the center, exhausted but determined, Marissa lingered a moment longer, looking out over the quiet streets of the community. The homes seemed serene, unaware of the storm of deception and recovery raging inside their HOA. But she knew the neighborhood would feel safer once they restored both the funds and the faith of the residents. Tomorrow promised more challenges, more late nights, and more meticulous work, but also the tantalizing possibility of victory. Willow Creek had been struck by fraud, yes, but it had not been broken. The battle for $35,400 was far from over, and the next day would bring them one step closer to justice. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Willow Creek Community Center, casting long streaks of light across the boardroom. Marissa Delgado arrived first, her eyes scanning the room as though the walls themselves might reveal hidden secrets. The previous days had been a whirlwind, uncovering the fraudulent company, tracing transfers through shell accounts, and coordinating with law enforcement. Now, with a concrete lead in hand, the board was prepared to confront the final phase of the investigation. Recovery. Marcus Lee was already seated, laptop open and documents spread across the table. "We have confirmation," he announced with controlled excitement. "The hijacked landscaping company account has been frozen, and authorities are preparing legal action to recover the funds held in related accounts. There's a path to reclaim the $35,400, but timing is critical. Any delay, and the fraudster could attempt to move funds through other hidden channels." The words carried both hope and tension. It was a delicate balance between victory and potential loss. Daniel Wu, the board president, looked unusually tense, fingers tapping against the table. "We've done everything we can internally," he said. "But this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. We're dealing with someone who's actively trying to outsmart us. How do we ensure they don't vanish before the recovery is complete?" Marcus leaned forward, voice steady. "That's where law enforcement comes in. They have access and authority we don't. We provide the evidence and guidance, and they execute the recovery. Our role now is to maintain documentation and keep the community informed without compromising the investigation." Sofia Hernandez had been reviewing the chain of emails once again. "I think we also have enough to identify the person behind the fake company," she said. "Cross-referencing IP addresses, email patterns, and the hijacked company details, there's a high likelihood it's someone familiar with small business accounting. Someone who knows how HOA operations work." Marissa felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea that the fraudster was so knowledgeable made the crime more personal, but it also meant their meticulous documentation might be the key to holding them accountable. By mid-morning, law enforcement agents arrived at the center, a quiet professionalism in their movements. Marcus and the board provided them with every file, every email, every suspicious transaction meticulously documented over the past week. Agents examined invoices, bank statements, and approval logs with precise attention, nodding at details the board had spent hours tracing. Marissa observed quietly, impressed by the speed at which the pieces were being assembled into a coherent case. Finally, one officer turned to the board. "We have enough to proceed with the recovery process," he said. "We can reclaim a significant portion of the funds and begin investigating the individuals responsible. Your detailed records made this possible." Hours later, Marissa received a call from the bank. The majority of the stolen $35,400 had been successfully recovered. Relief washed over her, mingled with disbelief. It had been a careful, coordinated effort, but the work of persistence, attention to detail, and quick action had paid off. The funds were restored to the HOA account, and the board could begin planning the projects that had been delayed by the fraud. Marissa exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that had pressed on her ever since the initial discovery. Even as the recovery was celebrated internally, the board knew the next step was equally critical: restoring trust with the residents. Marissa and Daniel drafted a clear, transparent communication explaining the incident, the steps taken to recover the funds, and the measures being implemented to prevent such fraud in the future. The letter emphasized vigilance, accountability, and the community's role in oversight, ensuring homeowners knew that the board had acted swiftly and responsibly. Sophia added a section highlighting the collaborative effort, noting the work of law enforcement, Marcus Lee, and the HOA team, reinforcing confidence in the process. By evening, the Willow Creek residents gathered in the community center for an emergency meeting. Faces filled with curiosity, concern, and skepticism watched as Marissa, Daniel, Sophia, and Marcus addressed the crowd. Marissa spoke first, her voice steady but heartfelt. "We faced a serious breach of trust when $35,400 were fraudulently transferred from our HOA account. It was a sophisticated scheme, but thanks to careful investigation, coordination with law enforcement, and the diligence of our board, we have successfully recovered the funds." The room exhaled collectively, murmurs of relief mixing with applause. Daniel continued, "This experience has taught us the importance of vigilance and thoroughness in our approval processes. We are implementing new measures to ensure nothing like this happens again, including stricter verification of vendors, multi-step approval checks, and ongoing financial audits." The residents nodded, many visibly reassured by the detailed explanation and the visible results. Sophia stepped forward, showing the board's work in mapping the fraudulent transactions and highlighting the investigative process. The transparency created a sense of accountability, demonstrating that the board had not only reacted but acted decisively. By the end of the evening, Willow Creek had begun to feel like itself again. The community had witnessed both the vulnerability and resilience of its leadership. Marissa stood at the edge of the room, looking out over the gathered residents, reflecting on the intense week behind her. The fraudulent company had operated in secret, exploiting loopholes and weaknesses, yet the board's persistence, strategy, and collaboration had turned the tide. Justice, in the form of recovered funds and accountability, had been achieved. As the community dispersed, Marissa felt a profound sense of closure. Willow Creek had faced a formidable challenge, one that threatened not just finances but trust and cohesion. Yet through meticulous investigation, strategic action, and unwavering commitment, they had prevailed. The $35,400 had been returned, the perpetrators identified, and the community reassured. The HOA had emerged stronger, wiser, and more vigilant, ready to safeguard the neighborhood against future threats. Standing outside under the now starlit sky, Marissa breathed deeply. The fight had been exhausting, stressful, and at times daunting, but the outcome was undeniable. Willow Creek was intact, the funds were secure, and the trust of the residents, though tested, had been restored. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. They had faced deception, danger, and uncertainty, yet they had not faltered. The community was safe, the money recovered, and the lesson clear. Vigilance, integrity, and perseverance were the cornerstones of both leadership and trust. And in that quiet, starlit moment, Marissa realized something fundamental. Willow Creek would endure, stronger than before, because its people and its leaders refused to be defeated. Tap follow and share so others can enjoy it as well.